There's a reason people don't listen to you. A reason your words land flat. A reason that, no matter how much truth you speak, the room goes quiet. Not in reverence, but disinterest. It's not because you're wrong. It's not because you're weak. And it's definitely not because you don't matter. The truth is harder to swallow. No one wants to hear you until you fix the one thing they can feel the second you open your mouth: your energy. The part of you that still seeks validation, that still argues with shadows, that still bleeds when it's ignored. Friedrich Nietzsche said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But what he didn't say directly, and what's buried beneath his most brutal truths, is that people don't follow your words. They follow your energy, your tone, your conviction. And if that's fractured, so is your message, so is your impact, so is your ability to be heard in a world where everyone's screaming just to avoid being forgotten. You're not invisible. You're just broadcasting pain, disguised as logic, disguised as opinion, disguised as authenticity. But people can tell. They can feel when your words are coming from a wound instead of a center, from a need instead of a knowing. And no one, no matter how much they love you, wants to be a witness to someone trying to fix themselves through attention. This isn't a video about how to speak better, how to argue smarter, how to convince people to respect you. This is about becoming the kind of person who doesn't need to be heard, and is heard anyway. Because once you fix this, once you shift your source from outer approval to inner truth, people don't just listen. They remember you. But first, I want you to slow down. Just for a second. Ask yourself this. Have you ever poured your heart into a conversation and watched the other person check their phone? Have you ever shared something raw, something real, and the reply was silence? Have you ever felt like no one really sees you, no matter how articulate, kind, or emotionally available you try to be? It's not in your head. You're picking up on something very real. But it's not the world that's broken. It's the pattern, the invisible loop you're trapped in. Nietzsche called it ressentiment, the quiet, unconscious bitterness that builds in the hearts of those who feel powerless but don't know how to reclaim themselves. And when ressentiment speaks, people tune out, because at a deep, primal level, humans are drawn to power. Not aggression, not dominance, but energetic integrity. And when you speak from a fractured self, when your words carry resentment, desperation, or unprocessed hurt, they don't land. Not because they're untrue, but because they come from a place people instinctively avoid. This is your first test. Can you recognize the truth in that without defensiveness? If you can, keep watching, because this video will reveal exactly what's broken inside that makes others withdraw from your truth, and more importantly, how to fix it. But before we continue, if you've already felt something shift, if any of this has been uncomfortably accurate, consider subscribing. I'm building a space for people like you, people who think deeply, who feel too much, who want to be heard, not for ego, but to matter. And if this video hits home, leave a comment below. Tell me, has this ever happened to you, where your words were invisible no matter how right you were? Now, let's go deeper. The reason people don't listen isn't just because of how you speak. It's why you speak. Most people speak to fill silence, or to prove they exist, or to be validated by someone else's reaction. But power, real psychological power, begins when you speak from a place that doesn't need to be heard. That's the paradox. When you no longer need others to approve of your truth, that's when your truth becomes magnetic. So why is this so hard? Because most of us were never taught to sit in silence without shrinking. We were taught to perform, to impress, to over-explain, to be so likable that rejection becomes impossible. But Nietzsche's philosophy rips that illusion to shreds. He believed that most people, even those who seem strong, are secretly ruled by resentment. They want to be seen as good, as noble, as enlightened. But underneath, they're still trying to win, still trying to prove something to the parent who ignored them, the friend who left, the lover who never listened. And that unresolved war, it lives inside your tone. It's in your eyes when you speak. It's in your pacing, your need to over-clarify, your frustration when they don't get it. People don't respond to words. They respond to wounds. And if you don't heal the part of you that's still broadcasting, "Please understand me," no one will. Here's where it gets even more difficult. Because once you realize this, you'll want to fix it overnight. You'll want to erase all neediness, all insecurity, all emotional hunger, and speak from a clean slate. But that's not how this works. Because the very impulse to be stronger is still coming from the need to be liked. The only way to fix this is to stop performing, to let the silence burn, to say less and mean more, to be okay with not being understood, not being praised, not being validated. And that is terrifying. But it's also the shift that changes everything. Because once you stop performing for attention, your words become pure. They start to carry weight, not because they're perfect, but because they come from alignment. Let me show you how this plays out, with a real story, maybe even one that feels familiar. There's a man. Let's call him Daniel. Daniel is brilliant, introspective, philosophical, the kind of guy who could talk for hours about the meaning of life, the patterns of the mind, the way people deceive themselves. He means well. He really does. But every time he speaks, people glaze over. They change the subject. Or worse, they give him a half-hearted, "Yeah, totally," before redirecting to something shallow. And Daniel feels it. That sting of invisibility. He doesn't know why it happens, but he keeps trying harder, sharing more insight, talking more passionately. But it only makes things worse. Because what Daniel doesn't realize is that his words aren't landing because they're soaked in need. He's not just sharing truth. He's trying to be the truth, so someone will finally see him. And people can feel that. It makes them uncomfortable. It feels like a trap. Because when someone is using insight as a bid for love, the listener becomes a hostage, and they pull away. But one day, Daniel breaks. He gets tired of trying. He stops performing. He lets go of being understood. And something strange happens. He says less. He listens more. And when he does speak, people lean in. Because now, there's no hook, no emotional leash, just clarity, calm, presence. And suddenly, people want to hear him because he fixed the thing that can't be faked, his energy. That's what Nietzsche meant when he said that those who climb the mountain do so alone, and only from the top do they finally get seen. Not because they yelled loud enough, but because their silence carried something no one could ignore. You have that potential, but you have to stop asking the world to rescue you from your own voice. You have to find stillness, and from that stillness, speak. Not to impress, not to defend, not to convert, but to witness your truth, whether they hear you or not, because the moment your words no longer come from need is the moment they begin to echo. You've felt it, haven't you? That moment where silence is louder than any insult. When you share something real and it lands like dust. When your insight, raw, vulnerable, thoughtful, is met with glazed eyes, a polite nod, maybe a distracted scroll on a phone. And that sting doesn't just fade. It builds. Layer by layer, it becomes a quiet shame, the kind you carry without noticing. You begin to doubt yourself, to question if what you feel is valid. And soon, without realizing it, you start editing your truth in real time, cutting the edges off your voice so it doesn't offend, overwhelm, or bore. This is the slow death of authenticity. And it's happening to people like you every single day. But Nietzsche wouldn't have told you to speak louder. He wouldn't tell you to rehearse your truth better, or to read books on charisma or social power. No, his response would have been darker, but more freeing. He would have told you, you are not ignored because the world is shallow. You are ignored because you are still trying to be understood by people who don't yet understand themselves. That's the sickness. That's the loop. You keep handing your emotional truth to people who are still allergic to theirs. You keep explaining your inner life to people who haven't met theirs. You want to be heard, not just as a voice, but as a soul, in a world that's trained itself to not feel deeply. And here's where this gets dangerous. Because if you don't see this clearly, you'll adapt. You'll dilute. You'll try to be relatable. You'll hide your depth inside memes, jokes, small talk, anything that keeps people from turning away. And over time, you'll become fluent in their language, but forget how to speak your own. That is Nietzsche's great warning. Not that people are weak, but that in trying to connect with the unawakened, the deep soul becomes shallow by choice. That's the real tragedy. Not being misunderstood, but being reshaped by misunderstanding. So how do you avoid that? By remembering what your voice is for. Your voice isn't a tool for approval. It's not a currency for attention. It's not even a bridge for connection. Not at first. It's a mirror. A living reflection of your alignment, your clarity, your being. And when you speak from a fractured identity, from insecurity, from spiritual hunger, from the ache of being unseen, your words are no longer mirrors. They're shields. And people feel that. They may not know why, but they back away. Not because you're too intense, but because you've stopped being real. Let's talk about energy now. Not in the mystical sense, but in the psychological one. Every human interaction is a subtle negotiation of energy. Who leads, who submits, who observes, who defends. And in this invisible dance, people are constantly asking, is this person safe? Are they solid? Do they need something from me? do they know themselves? If your energy says, I need you to validate my pain, the answer is no, even if your words are true. But if your energy says, I am at peace with my pain, I don't need you to understand it, but I'm offering it freely, the answer becomes yes. That's what Nietzsche pointed to again and again, the ideal of the Übermensch, not as a strong man, but as a self-contained being. One who no longer performs, one who no longer begs, one who lives so deeply in alignment that even their silence teaches. Now, this level of self-possession doesn't come quickly, and it doesn't come without cost. You'll lose people. You'll lose comfort. You'll lose the old version of yourself that was willing to shape-shift for scraps of attention. But what you gain is unshakable. Let me show you how this works with another story, not from a book, but from real life. There's a woman. Let's call her Mira. Mira is empathic, articulate. She's spent her whole life being the good listener, the one who holds space, the one who understands without being understood. And one day, she decides to share her truth, her depression, her fear, her spiritual awakening. She does it carefully, with elegance, but instead of connection, she's met with silence, confusion, maybe even discomfort. At first, she blames herself. I must have said it wrong. I'm too much. Maybe I should have waited. But over time, she sees the truth. Her words weren't rejected. Her depth was. Because the people around her weren't ready to hear someone who no longer needed their approval. And that's the fork in the road. One path leads back to people-pleasing, to surface living, to emotional starvation. The other leads inward, to solitude, to strength, to clarity. Mira chooses the second path. She speaks less, but when she speaks, it's with gravity. She no longer begs to be seen. She is seen, not by everyone, but by those who are ready. And eventually, she becomes the kind of person whose silence says more than her old performance ever did. This is the kind of transformation Nietzsche points toward. Not the loud voice in the room, but the anchored one, the presence that doesn't flinch when misunderstood, the self that no longer argues with people who haven't done their own work. So, if you're still feeling invisible, still wondering why your words don't land, ask yourself, am I speaking from alignment or from ache? Am I sharing because it's true or because I want to be rescued? Am I okay with not being heard as long as I didn't betray my voice? Because here's the cruel irony. The moment you stop trying to be heard is the moment you begin to be felt. Not in the ego-driven way, but in the soul-driven way. You begin to attract listeners, not audiences. You begin to build connections, not impressions. You begin to matter, not because you fought for it, but because you no longer needed it. And that's what Nietzsche was really saying, beneath all the darkness. He didn't hate people. He hated performance. He didn't worship strength. He worshipped sovereignty. And he didn't want you to dominate others. He wanted you to stop being dominated by your own hunger for attention. Because when you do that, when you become self-sourced, self-fed, self-anchored, your words take on a different texture. They stop feeling like persuasion. They become presence. And people notice. They don't know why, but they trust you. Not because you're agreeable, but because you're real. And in a world of mirrors, the real face always stands out. That's the power you're craving. Not applause, not validation, but resonance. The kind of resonance that can't be faked. And it only comes from this one thing: fixing the part of you that still needs to be seen. Because once you do, the world won't be able to look away. You've spent your life trying to be heard, trying to say it right, trying to time it well, to find the words, the tone, the perfect moment. You've practiced self-awareness. You've studied psychology. You've listened more than you've spoken. And still, the same silence, the same blank stares, the same feeling that your voice echoes into rooms that never echo back. But here's the truth you weren't ready for before, the most brutal one. People didn't ignore you because you were unworthy. They ignored you because you were unanchored. They could feel, on some level, that you weren't speaking from your truth. You were speaking toward theirs, like a hook, like a silent plea. Please understand me. Please meet me here. Please tell me I matter. And that's what repels people. Not because you're weak, but because need has a scent. It pushes people away. Not because they're cruel, but because, on a primal level, they don't want to become responsible for your healing. This is the deep cut, the one you've spent years trying not to feel. But Nietzsche never avoided the cut. He dove into it. He lived in it. He believed that power doesn't come from conquering others. It comes from surviving the death of the self you no longer need. That death is painful because it means letting go of every performance you've rehearsed. It means letting silence win. It means becoming okay with not being applauded, not being praised, not being heard at all. But from that surrender, from that ego funeral, something wild is born. Presence. The kind of presence that doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't try to prove. It just is. And when you speak from that place, people don't just hear you. They feel you. Because now there's no agenda, no emotional leash, no invisible demand. There's just truth. Clean, calm, fully integrated. That's what makes people listen. Not your articulation, not your cleverness, but your stillness. That rare, grounded stillness that only shows up when someone has finally stopped trying to be understood. You see, people are drowning in noise. They hear 10,000 voices a day, most of them trying to sell, persuade, impress. But when someone speaks with no performance in their tone, no hunger in their eyes, no need in their words, the world stops. Because that kind of voice is rare, and rare is magnetic. But how do you get there? You go through the fire. You sit with the ache of not being heard, and you don't flinch. You let the silence echo back without rushing to fill it. You stop editing your truth just to make it easier to digest. You stop wrapping your words in cotton just to be liked. And you say it raw, not loud, not soft, just true. And you let that be enough. You let your truth stand alone, whether it's received or not. Because when you stop needing a reaction, your words become free. And that freedom, that's what people can't ignore. Let me give you one final story. There was a philosopher once, not in books, not on stages, but in the way he lived. We'll call him Elias. Elias never fought for attention, never forced his insight on anyone. He rarely spoke unless it was necessary. And when he did, people leaned in, because he wasn't trying to win. He wasn't trying to teach. He wasn't even trying to be right. He was just aligned. His presence said what his mouth didn't. When he shared an idea, it landed. Not because it was loud, but because it was clean. There was no hook in it, no plea for understanding, no emotional leash. And that's why it echoed. People trusted him, not because he demanded it, but because his energy could hold silence. That's what you must learn, to hold the silence, to stop fearing it, to speak not for applause, but for alignment, to stop throwing words at people who aren't ready. Because here's the most painful part. The people you most want to hear you probably never will, at least not now, because they don't have the capacity yet. And if you don't accept that, if you keep waiting for them to wake up, to see you, to circle back, you'll keep yourself small. You'll keep your voice locked in the same loop, waiting for the people who broke your clarity to be the ones who validate it. That's not strength. That's spiritual paralysis. You have to free yourself from that loop. And that means grieving the idea that your voice will change them. It won't. But it can change you. It can set you free. Because once you're no longer trying to be heard by the wrong people, the right ones find you. Not because you went louder, but because you got clearer. And that clarity is what Nietzsche meant when he wrote, "And those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music." You're not insane. You're just playing a melody others haven't learned to listen to. Don't mute it. Don't slow it down to match their rhythm. Keep playing. Because eventually, someone will hear it. And when they do, you won't have to explain yourself. They'll just nod, because they've been waiting to hear it too.